I'm David Evans, a visiting scholar at mediaX. My background's in areas like natural language processing, artificial intelligence, cognitive science, information science. I got all my degrees here at Stanford, but I was in the wilderness of Carnegie Mellon University for many years, professor of linguistics and computer science. I started some companies and had a chance to apply my ideas in the real world. So I have almost no actual expertise on the topics I'm going to be telling you about today. In fact, what I'd like to do is just reflect a bit on what we've already learned, maybe amplify some things that have already been said, and point us in a direction, at least we at mediaX in a direction, us at mediaX in a direction, that maybe could enlist some of your help as well. I'd like to begin by just reminding us, as we've already been reminded, that there's been a lot of stuff in history that has exploited information that isn't necessarily always what it seems to be. Now, some of this is legitimate. Ripley's Believe It or Not has been around for a long time. And the whole idea behind it was that people would be interested in learning something obscure that might be a little weird too. That column from 1937 actually has something interesting in it. This drawing of a dog by the Sparky was actually the first known drawing by Charles Schulz, the inventor of peanuts. Recently, the woman who is featured in this photo died, and so there were interesting obituaries about it. And what's interesting is that we're invited to make lots of inferences when we see this photo. In fact, according to the obits, this was staged. Not the reactions on the street, but the walking down and the appearance of the woman, that was all kind of staged. And yet, it has become something iconic in our collective memories. Some great institutions like The Onion continue to spoof us all the time. And we can read those. There's nothing dishonest about it. We know that we're reading something that's designed to reflect on current events by telling something other than the truth. And of course, we've seen various other kinds of images mobilized for political purposes, though in the most recent instance of this image that I encountered, it was clickbait to lead to an article that had nothing at all to do with the apparent topic that the image is presenting us with. And there have, of course, been other news articles recently that remind us that fraud is big and makes people a lot of money. This French museum discovered that about half of its paintings were fakes. And we've all learned recently that there are, in fact, a lot of great masterpieces that are probably forgeries. And this is just a sample of a few images of such masterpieces. Now, truth and transparency and trust are concepts that make a lot of sense to us today, but we must remind ourselves that truth is actually a very deep and problematic philosophical concept. Jacques Derrida and others have attempted to help us contextualize these issues. Trust is something else, and it's what we don't want to lose. I want to think about trust for a moment in the context of institutions. Think of the Justice Department, the court system, a journal like Science. Trust in institutions traditionally derives from a number of attributes, not any one of which is alone sufficient to create the trust that the institution strives for. Typically, institutions that ask for our trust have some stated mission or purpose. There's some authority associated with them. We expect the people who are running them to know something about the thing that they ask us to trust them with. There are often standards, methodologies for how those standards and how the work of the institution is done. There's accountability, enforcement, and adjudication. This is really true of the scientific enterprise. And the trust emerges from this. It's an emergent property, but it's not a scientific element, and these attributes are not scientific. Transparency helps us understand how the work behind each of these attributes, the details behind the attributes, occur, but that alone, again, does not give us trust. Now, fake news is a topic that we're all concerned with acutely now, in part because of the active measures campaign during the US presidential election and the general and targeted disinformation that has been launched out of many sites, both during and subsequent to that election. Disinformation is not at all a new phenomenon, as we all know. And in political and social contexts, disinformation is often a very effective way of sowing distrust and eroding an opponent's position or destroying credibility in institutions. And this matters because erosion of trust in the media generally threatens democracy, but it also threatens the creative freedoms that people exercise in an open environment, on the web, for example. And I think that one of the problems that we need to be cognizant of is that the kinds of solutions that are likely to emerge from legislatures or outsiders who are looking at this issue and feel they need to respond in some way will pose threats to information platforms that we've come to rely upon as the soft institutions that make the World Wide Web actually useful and have helped it become a democratic forum to some extent that affects billions of people. So what is to be done about all this? I think that if we hope for intelligence responses to this problem, and I'm talking about ones that don't just mandate prohibitions or censorship or practices that are not practical, then it's important for us in the academic and tech communities to take a lead and to change expectations, standards, and practices. But it's critical, I think, to recognize that the solutions are not going to derive from technological tweaks, however sophisticated, that are implemented behind proprietary curtains. I think the process that will lead us to an answer, whatever that process is, must be conducted in full public view and must be informed by sensitivities to non-technical aspects of information ecosystems. There are lots of changes from current practice that we must come to support, I believe, and this is just a sample. That would include, for example, some kind of continuous transparency and easy comprehension of, for example, sources of information. Perhaps providing reasons why an information object has been delivered to a person, explainable in layman's language. If I got a particular document at the top of my search results, maybe the simplest explanation is the algorithm thought I liked pictures of kittens. And so I'm in that category, and that's why it gave me that particular result. That may not be flattering to me or to the algorithm, but it's the truth. And that may be the sort of information that we should have access to. And we need some kind of independent and verifiable means of adjudicating disputes and challenges. The big lie is a great technique in politics. We're seeing it practiced now on a very large stage. But the big dispute is also part of it. Change your story every time someone challenges you. Introduce alternative facts. Keep people guessing. We need some adjudication process. Today, apparently, it's not enough to say, well, I read it in the New York Times or the Washington Post, because those are, after all, biased media. We can't trust those kinds of papers anymore, can we? Now, I think that ultimately we're going to need both technical and non-technical ingredients in any solution. And I'm throwing out here just a few very bulletized ideas of some areas of technical interest. Oop. Please, not that fast. For example, among technical ingredients of a solution, some sort of anti-spoofing, grounded identity associated with the people who are producing or publishing material would be very helpful. The persistence of facts, blockchain techniques could be useful here, but also repositories that we can return to again and again. Automated tagging, thinking about the counterfactuals, looking adversarially at documents, linking to sources that provide for the pieces of an assembled piece of information. Perhaps crowdsourcing with some idea of rating news for validity, an automated verification engine that would exploit secondary and tertiary information to support this process of validation and invalidation. And also designs that take account of the fact that we suffer intuitive and automatic biases in how we think. And I think that while it's easy to exploit some of those biases, it's a real challenge to see how we can use the biases to counter the exploitation. I think that there also are some important non-technical ingredients that we have to consider. First, we need to elevate the public discussion. Certainly there is discussion. I'm not sure it's yet elevated. We may need to have some new kinds of formal organizations, perhaps consortia of news groups supporting repositories or some other way of collecting and sharing facts. And awareness of the problem by technical and non-technical standards bodies. I think there's plenty of room here for activity by IEEE and NIST, maybe even groups like DARPA that have an interest in the quality of information that's being delivered to individuals using it. We might consider creating new ratings bodies with high visibility and offering seals of approval, stamps on documents that have manifested best practices. And we need government and private foundation funding for research and development. I'm skeptical about the government side of that in this administration. Now, this is what I consider to be the real challenge for our particular community. Science depends on replicability, and we need data. And we need to share the data. But relevant data for a lot of what we're talking about are behind proprietary walls of private companies. This has frustrated research and information science for groups outside those companies now for more than a decade. But this is a particularly critical area. I think now more than ever, we, the policymakers, the public, scientists, need transparency in research and results because closed doors will just admit no light here and can always be challenged by outside groups. So that brings me to a few action items. I mentioned that we've got a new research theme at mediaX called Truth, Transparency, and Trust. And we recognize explicitly that this is a vast problem touching on many disciplines. It's unlikely that any single group will have all the resources or networks required to succeed alone. But we believe firmly that work in this area will most successfully proceed in trusted partnerships among commercial enterprises and research institutions such as Stanford. mediaX can facilitate those kinds of partnerships. This is our pitch. We hope to identify 3 to 5 companies who would like to sponsor this work and join with researchers at Stanford in exploring topical areas that touch on these problems. Now, why mediaX? Well, I think we've already heard from Martha today that there are many good reasons why mediaX has enjoyed almost a unique position at universities around the country in being the outward face of the university toward the industrial commercial world. Uniquely, mediaX has an emphasis on human science and design coupled with technology, information technology in particular. And it provides, of course, access to faculty, access to students, and public visibility. And there are already many existing Stanford initiatives. Martha mentioned these at the beginning of her presentation, going on through Stanford that could be drawn into this or made accessible through mediaX for outside groups. There are some new activities already underway. There are the TTT seminars. There's more information about these on page 20 of the program that you got today. But we're also thinking about holding out June 12th as a potential additional seminar that we would make available to some collection of outside groups that would like to come to present ideas, perhaps contributing to this project. We've got some excellent speakers lined up for our existing seminars, but we'd like to identify more, perhaps for something special on June the 12th. I'd also like to mention that Karina Alexanian's course on digital media disruption has some great readings in it, and you should contact her to get a syllabus. I think it's well worth your time. And we have plans for future workshops and conferences in the autumn, and some of these will be specifically on the TTT theme. If you would like further discussion about this and any follow-up, please contact any of these wonderful people who are part of the mediaX team, but also looking specifically at the TTT problems. And I thank you very much.